The Pacers play game one against the New York Knicks. Ends up being closer than I think the general consensus was of this game. The Knicks rally late, 121-117 ends up being the final score. The Pacers were tied with 52 seconds left to go. Obviously, some controversial calls at the end, some Tyrese not taking shots at the end. I think those are the two places we want to start. So I'm just going to come in hot here. Did the refs cost the Pacers the game, Samson?
My friend Makai, a dear friend of mine, he's from New York, and I told him, I was like, I have a tweet in my draft saying, I can't believe the worst second round team of all time won game one against the Knicks. I was like sitting on it, like, oh, do I get to tweet this? Obviously not. Did the refs cost the Pacers the win? No, I don't think so. It's kind of what I wrote in my piece about how the refs removed the Pacers' ability to kind of like keep up. They just weren't able to. And that was difficult. What the Knicks did was they won the game. They had tremendous performances from a few different players. Josh Hart turning it up on the offensive end, turning it up in transition, getting on the glass. He was incredible. Jalen Brunson, not every guy who goes to the line 14 times is hitting all 14. As much as it is incredibly disappointing that the best refs in the world just decided on a whim that Aaron Nesmith's hand is his foot. And that led to a Dante DiVincenzo 3. It wasn't an easy 3. It was a deep one, and he banged it. I just wish the Pacers didn't lose a few opportunities to fast break, didn't lose the possession battle that way, just out of the refs' hands. And I wish we could have seen a couple more possessions where the Pacers got to try and like counter punch, whereas the momentum of the game kind of got slowed down and taken away from them. But refs miss calls. That's the game. It sucks, but that's the game.
Yeah, I mean, they already said that it was a phantom kickball and that was an incorrect call at the time with 52 seconds left when Dante did hit that.
That's
3.
Probably a 5-point swing, which is tough.
I will say I think it was a little bit easier of a 3 than you think that it was, because Tyrese was motioning for Aaron Nesmith to go sit at the nail to take away Jalen Brunson's left hand. And instead of stunting up to Dante, Tyrese stayed down attached to Josh Hart, even though Miles was already on the baseline and could have busted through that pin in if you needed to. So that was another area where it didn't really look to me like Tyrese was moving at 100%. So that was made a little bit easier than it needed to be, regardless of the call. People on my Patreon know I've probably written this sentence several times this season. I always say that I'm not going to be a ref analyst. Like, I'm not going to go audit every single call. That sounds about as miserable as relying on referees to win basketball games. So there's that aspect of it. I don't blame fans if they're mad because they missed that call. It was at a critical point of the game, so I understand it. But also the Pacers kind of put themselves in some of those positions. I mean, there were several 94-foot drives from Josh Hart. There was gambling unnecessarily against Isaiah Hartenstein, which allowed Josh Hart to get to the rim. And then Josh Hart missed his second free throw and got his own rebound on a missed free throw, which just cannot happen at any point in the game, let alone during crunch time. And plus that miscue on that rotation against Dante on that key three-pointer and other things that had happened throughout the game. And I'm pretty confident we'll probably see one of the plays later, but like you'll see other missed calls throughout the basketball game. Yeah. I don't think that helped the Pacers. It certainly put them in a more compromised position, just as the moving screen call did, even though that one was confirmed as a moving screen. But
even to go to the other side, like the refs, I think collectively were 0 for 5 late on change of possession calls. And they got one wrong against the Knicks. It was just fortunate that the Knicks had a challengeable action that they could challenge it because it went off of Nembhard's foot. The tough thing is that was a dead ball turnover. The one against Brunson where Brunson hit it off Haliburton and then it came back to Brunson, dead ball. The 2 that got called and the one that couldn't be overturned against the Pacers, live ball turnovers. It just shakes out in such a way. And like, that's the thing, premeditation, are the refs cooking the books? I don't think so. But the difference in the calls is like live ball action. And that's just, less intervention to correct ref mistakes is where it's like, damn. But
I mean, even the shot from Miles that they overturned on the challenge from the Knicks, where they said that Brunson didn't make body contact.
Smacked the hell out of him.
And then it got overturned. And on the play before that, when Pascal went to the line, which I think Pascal missed both of his free throws anyways, like that one didn't look like a foul.
He didn't.
They called it a foul.
He got the ball. I don't think he got touched.
Yeah, I don't think
when he was going up and he left his short. Yeah.
But then Miles did seem to get fouled to me on the next one when they overturned it. So
refs, but
I don't know.
that's like that's where you think to some degree, like a ref, you're not necessarily calling it by the book every time, but you're calling the game holistically. So if the whole reffing crew knows like, oh, we missed one, there's maybe like you'll be more lenient for the next one. You're trying to even the odds throughout the game, so you're like, okay. But then the Pacers just got like a boatload of tough ones down the stretch. So like, anyway, enough ref talk.
Enough ref talk. The other things that happened during the final minutes of the game, the Pacers played their starters the last 6 minutes and 55 seconds. And just for point of reference, for people who didn't know, at the end of the third quarter, all of the starters for the Knicks had played over 30 minutes, with the exception of Isaiah Hartenstein, who was in foul trouble. None of the starters for the Pacers had accumulated 30 minutes yet. So I think by the end of the game, the only two that played over 35, and it might have just been 36, was Tyrese and Pascal. Meanwhile, Josh Hart played the entire basketball game. So you would have expected going into those last 6 minutes, or at least I did, that the Pacers would be the fresher team. And yet they got outscored 24-17. The only two Pacers who even attempted shots were Nembhard and Pascal. Tyrese never attempted a shot, never got to the line, and had 3 turnovers. So I feel like this is something that needs to be discussed and probably got overshadowed to a degree because of what the reffing controversy was. So Tyrese only took 6 shots for the entire game. It bears pointing out that Isaiah Jackson took as many shots as Tyrese, and certainly more shots in the paint than Tyrese, because Tyrese only took 1 shot inside the 3-point line.
I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't mean for it to be controversial. I ask this earnestly. Please trust me to ask you this question. Was Tyrese one of the 2 best guards on the Pacers in game 1?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So what I did was I went for the first time, went and saw the comments under my piece, and I saw somebody had probably a critique of how much I like Nembhard. And true, I'll wear that on the chin. I like Nembhard a lot, but I don't think that Nembhard was the sticking point of the backcourt in game 1. And I know Nembhard could be better, and I know Brunson got his game off, and we talked about why that might be difficult. But the guard stuff, it starts with Tyrese, and I'll let you kind of, go off on this, but why do you think this is a recurring thing, and why do you think this has been happening?
Actually, let's compare him to TJ really quick, because
Sure.
I think that this bears pointing out, because somebody did ask me last night, they're like, well, I'm watching TJ get into the paint with ease, and why can't Tyrese do this at this point in time? Well, first and foremost, they're being guarded by different players and guarded in different ways. So almost every time that TJ was getting into the paint, he was being guarded by Jalen Brunson. And I give him a lot of credit because he tested Jalen Brunson and was willing to just blow right past him and get to the rim. But also he was being guarded by somebody who would let him blow right past him and get to the rim. Whereas Tyrese is being heavily guarded by Donte DiVincenzo, denied on most off-ball actions that the Pacers were trying to get into. Several of the pet plays that they tried to get into late in the fourth quarter, the Knicks sat on and were ready and knew what the counters were going to be and took those away. And that's different than what TJ's being guarded like, especially when TJ's off the ball and nobody's within 5 feet of him. Whereas I'm Tyrese and I need to make misdirection cuts to even have a chance to be able to get open on some of these actions. So that's very different. And also Nembhard started the game being guarded by Jalen Brunson. And you and Benji and I had kind of talked about that. Like, what is the best way to target Brunson? Is it with Tyrese hunting him, or is it with Nembhard just using him as the on-ball defender and you're just tilting more of the offense that way? Or is it using Brunson as a weak side defender? And as it turned out, the Pacers leaned more heavily into running stuff through Nembhard to try to put Brunson through more actions. And I support that on certain plays. Like I wrote an article about this morning. It's paywalled, but if people have looked at it and want to read it, like the same plays they're running against Dame, where like Nembhard gets to come off an Iverson cut, that's 2 off-ball screens. Then he's getting an empty but side ball screen that he's rejecting. Then he's coming off a double drag. That's forcing Jalen Brunson to guard 5 picks on 1 possession. Smart. I totally understand why you're doing it. But on the other hand, Tyrese they were switching against him to start the game. They mixed in blitz throughout the game. Yep. He's being hounded by Donte DiVincenzo and or Josh Hart. It's very different coverage to begin with.
Those guys did a really good job, by the way.
Yeah. And I will say that, like, I'm sure people are thinking, yeah, but Tyrese is the all-star, and that's very true. But some clips that I would run through in this particular game that I think are telling, which people will see some of these in the article, is I want to take everybody back to November and let them see this possession against the Orlando Magic with similar coverage to what the Knicks were playing last night. So Jalen Suggs in this game, very aggressive, denying, face guarding Tyrese. And the number one play that the Pacers go to when Tyrese is getting face guarded is it's Chicago action. So it's going to be a pin down into a handoff, but they will have the person setting the pin down come up through the middle from the baseline and turn screen that so that Jalen Suggs doesn't see the approach. And so you're also getting extra separation before Tyrese gets into that handoff. So that's what Bruce Brown does here. Tyrese is able to get the ball downhill. The Magic end up switching it. And he does get off the ball quickly against the switch, but when he gets it back, he throws that boomerang, sees the ghost screen from Obi, throws the boomerang to Obi, backs up, and then you're going to see that he completely drives Goga all the way to the rim and actually attacks that switch. Now, when we watch in the Knicks game at the start of the first quarter, he gets this cross match against Hartenstein, immediately is throwing it to the weak side corner against Jalen Brunson. I understand that read. But when he gets it back, like he wants to get to that righty sidestep to create space going to the right. He can't get to it. Hartenstein's playing him fairly close. Takes that same boomerang pass, has to get a ghost screen from Pascal. And even look what Pascal did when he set that ghost screen. Watch how he pulls on Isaiah Hartenstein's arm. Like that's how serious he is trying to remove that so that Tyrese can get downhill. And obviously Pascal doesn't make that from above the break.
Did you also think like after Pascal airballed that, Tyrese put it back in? He beat the shot clock.
And did he actually?
He beat the shot clock. There's actually a still image of him beating the shot clock, and they called it a shot clock violation. I wondered on that one if Tyrese stepped out.
I thought he stepped out and didn't reestablish himself.
That's what I thought happened too, and they just called it a shot clock violation instead. But yeah, a little bit muddy there as well. Interesting, but yeah.
So there was multiple times in the first quarter against those switches with Isaiah Hartenstein where he didn't even try to drive the switch. He immediately, on that play alone, he threw the ball off 3 times when he could have gone at Isaiah Hartenstein and he didn't. So very different than what he did against Goga, which different types of defenders, but you see the point. So here they are in the fourth quarter trying to get to that same turn screen action. Isaiah Jackson running the handoff, Aaron Nesmith coming up from the baseline, Dante DiVincenzo kind of denying that, but you don't see Tyrese really going to a misdirection cut or doing anything to actually go and get that handoff. He just circles out of it. This virtually becomes a split action now between he and Nesmith, which is not how they would normally run this play. And then he literally points for Nesmith to get the ball. And that might be him being somewhat cerebral because Jalen Brunson is on Nesmith, and that's what allows him to get downhill and get that dunk.
Oh, my God.
But there's multiple times in the fourth quarter where, again, they're going to try to run it. Nesmith's going to set the turn screen. Tyrese is like, he doesn't even use it. Like, he doesn't even think about using that. He's just looking at Nembhard and Miles. And then Nesmith goes back down to the baseline. And they don't use it again until this ends up just being a possession from Nembhard where he falls down. So 2 times Tyrese rejected that turn screen on that possession. Then this was the really telling one defensively to me, where Brunson's hunting Tyrese. And through post-All-Star break, they almost exclusively use show coverage on this when Tyrese gets hunted. At the very least, it's going to be a switch. And he is literally playing drop as a 6'5" guard, doesn't hold on the ball, recovers back out to Dante DiVincenzo, and isn't even remotely in a stance. He's basically at a 45-degree angle, standing like he's about as brittle as he can be. And then that ends up being an easy drive for Brunson to the rim in the fourth quarter. So that's kind of what I ran over in the article. Like, I just truthfully don't think that he looks like he's able to move at his full maneuverability. And if this is a player where they tell me, like, if everybody when the season's over says, hey, Tyrese was 100%, then I have a lot of questions for why he's operating the way that he is and why the Pacers are using him the way that he is, because they're not, down the stretch, they were not featuring him. They were trying to run some of those actions. He was denying them and turning down the very plays that they've gone to during the regular season. And on the flip side of that, they were running way more of it through Nembhard. And by the end of the game, Nembhard was not even being guarded by Brunson anymore. Brunson was guarding Aaron Nesmith. So I have a lot of question marks in that regard, but I'll listen to what your opinion of it was.
And unfortunately as well, once Tyrese got the ball late, we had those 2 turnovers. The one live dribble, OG got the poke in. And then also when the bounce pass went too far ahead of Miles. That's unfortunate. And that's where a lot of these conversations have kind of been going between you and I around this team. I think everybody knew coming into the last series and this series, Pascal Siakam can be like fantastic, but the way that the Pacers play is not built around his greatest strength. In fact, I think they go away from them quite often. And that's fine because Pascal isn't the defining player of this team. Tyrese not being able to like input onto the game outside of kind of impacting style or coverages is a really tough hurdle for the Pacers to completely jump over. And like a credit to Tyrese, he's still able to impact coverages. He's still able to kind of like impact flow and pace and style of the game, especially with these hit ahead passes. And some of the reads have been really good. Like the one where he looked the tag back into the corner and fired it to Miles under the rim. Great pick and roll stuff. The pass to Pascal for Pascal, bucket of the game, hitting these really tight windows. Good passing stuff. Get wide, create the angle, find it. That kind of stuff is great. But 6 points, 6 shots, nothing late, turnovers. That's tough. And as you say, like that passivity is really tough to look past if we don't all kind of maybe find a consensus that when players play so much different in this way, usually we expect there to be an off-season or end of series announcement about health. And for some people, that's like too convenient, and they want to talk, well, he's on the floor, you expect X or Y, but it's a tough spot right now for Tyrese. And I think like there's probably, even if he's fully healthy, you can look at how playoff basketball is played. You can look at how it really makes guards kind of like turn the ball downhill a little bit more. It makes them like really have to use their hand a little bit more. And those were always going to be concerns with Tyrese. But to this degree, I would think like he's having a tough time with health, probably.
I mean, he's been listed as questionable in each of the last 3 games with back spasms. Literally every time he comes off the court, he's wearing a contraption to help him deal with this problem. So I don't think
He's
it's
like,
necessarily that far-fetched that
the Baron Harkonnen, like the,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that far-fetched, and that's why I wanted to show that play from November against a very good Magic defense and that he attacked it completely differently, even though the coverage was very similar, both against the switches and with how he came off of that turn screen to get downhill and what he saw coming out of it. Because I like that you bring up the play with OG in the corner against Pascal and the overall dynamic with Pascal, because these are clips that I would share from late in the game too, where it's either passivity where, he's getting there at Mitchell Robinson, circles back out. Look where Dante DiVincenzo is when he gets off the ball and circles back out. Like he doesn't think this can be a shot. Like he's not ready to power into that. That's somewhat telling all on its own. But they get into several of the plays that they would typically run in these situations. And well, there's another one. Like he can't stop and go. He can't like use a hesitation and have any degree of burst to get around Deuce McBride, which Deuce McBride's a pesky defender, but like this doesn't look 100% to me. Here's a common sideline out of bounds play. Like this is supposed to be veer. Like it's supposed to be Miles setting the ball screen for Andrew Nemhard and then veering into a pin down for Tyrese. DiVincenzo's top-siding that. So then Tyrese is just like, well, I'll just pin in DiVincenzo, which is a good heads-up play for him as the screener. But you can see how much the Knicks are sitting on a lot of these plays and really preventing him from being able to get off of off-ball actions. And the fact that he's just leaning into, like, I'm just going to be a screener. I'm just going to be, like, on the periphery of the actions and trying to reshape stuff for my teammates with, off-ball gravity and movement. But this is one, the Pacers call this slice. It's a ram screen for the first screener to get up there and set what would be a ball screen, but it actually just becomes a rip screen because Tyrese always throws it ahead to the person at the elbow into a handoff. So think of it as a rip screen into a handoff. Typically, that first screener will always be Pascal Siakam. It is pretty much never Aaron Nesmith. He's going to be the person dotting the corner. I don't know why the Pacers went to having Aaron doing this late because, yes, he's being guarded by Jalen Brunson, but Jalen Brunson did not switch on any of these screens. They tried running double drags with him as the first screener. They tried running this play with him as the first screener. He wasn't switching. So I don't really know what the benefit was to relocating him up to the top of the key, but Tyrese gets that. And that's why I don't really understand why you would ever want Pascal Siakam in the ball side corner of this action when literally OG, I don't know who you would say is a better pick six defender to muck up passing lanes and driving lanes than OG Anunoby, but that's exactly what he does, and Tyrese loses the handle there. Like, that's just not optimizing the spacing around Tyrese. So at a certain point in time, like, just so people can see that action, Aaron always circles out and goes to the opposite corner. Pascal is typically the first screener, toss it ahead to Miles, and that's how Tyrese gets downhill with the two shooters or the two guards dotting the corners. But, like, my point would be, and I'll get your opinion on it, if Tyrese is at all limited, with it's just speculation on my part, based on what I'm seeing, at the very least, he's not operating at his full capacity for whatever reason. To me, the Pacers either have to be like, hey, we have to be meticulous with the spacing around him and be as detail-oriented as possible because this isn't getting it done, or they just need to lean into giving more possessions to Pascal and hoping that he can do what he did pretty successfully last night one-on-one against OG Anunoby, and maybe eventually draw some double teams and go from there, because like that stuff with those things getting denied isn't really it to me.
It's, you watch it, and while Steph Curry kind of inverted this a little bit and brought it along, what makes the game move is a drive to the basket. And currently the Pacers, it isn't that Tyrese has always is like, he just isn't a guy who drives. That's not the case. He drives. He doesn't drive as much as TJ. He doesn't drive as some other guards who have like a similar amount of volume, but he drives, and there is at least a semblance of pressure. How do you replicate that danger? How do you try and create those types of situations? And you look at some of these examples you pull, like the stop and go is not there. The passivity when he has advantaged closeouts, when like whether it's the jumper, because you are a great shooter, Tyrese, or whether it's like taking advantage of a guy really having to step out on you, something has to happen. This is what made Tyrese dangerous, is like these boomerangs, these like, we talked about this years ago on a podcast we were doing with my stuff, where we're saying Tyrese is kind of limited in this sense with his handle and burst. How does he make it happen? And you say, well, it's about like weaponizing the closeout, being so quick and cerebral to get the ball back and then start attacking in motion. That isn't even really present in these series that we've seen, whether it's like against the Bucks or against the Knicks here. Being really, really particular about weaponizing him and putting him in easier situations, maybe, but you could probably make the case that the Pacers have a little bit better chance to muck this thing up a little bit in the half court. Muck it up a little bit in the half court and give Pascal a few more possessions, especially initiation that doesn't necessarily come like out of the post or, a 45 extended isolation. Like having Pascal run through some screens above the break, seeing how the Knicks react to some of those, like what their coverages are in response, it might allow for you to figure some things out. It might allow for Tyrese to come open. It might allow for some other stuff there. But it's tough because the pace, and I suspect that's why the Pacers don't do it, is because Pascal plays at a slower pace. Pascal's good at creating, but it's slower. And the Pacers like to play fast, and that's an advantage, and one that they were able to press early and often. They're in a difficult spot where, like, the points per possession, you might be able to see it with more possessions going towards Pascal. But overall pace, style, you might lose a little bit of yourself in it too. It's tough.
Yeah, and I think that's all really valid, because you bringing that up, something that I said those 2 years ago, or however long it was now, that he would fake the righty sidestep three, draw the big to his body, throw the pass off, and then it's a give and go. So he's beating the switch with motion or a cut rather than having to do it with the dribble, which I thought was an effective way to beat it. But last night against Hartenstein, he wasn't even going to that. And part of the problem too was the Knicks were like, we know that you're going to try to create space with your shot. So Hartenstein has his heels clear outside the 3-point line. Like, how many bigs are going to be willing to go that far from the basket? Because in the past, like when he went off for 43 points against the Miami Heat, yes, he started that game hitting the switch pocket against Bam, but eventually Bam had to come play him a lot closer, and then he closed out the game being able to drive and get into the paint more against those switches, and that isn't something that we're really seeing right now. So at a certain point in time, I've always pointed this out. There's a reason why the Pacers were ghosting so many switches. There's a reason why they were using those ghost screens. It wasn't just because, it was a fun mode of offense and it looked cool to see all these people dissecting the 3-point line. Like, it was a means that they needed to get to the next action and to help him gain traction. And now that stuff isn't there, and it becomes even more noticeable if, like we said, if he is somewhat limited or whatever's going on there. Because even in the third quarter, like, he did make a pass. Here's one time where he did get into the turn screen. He got it. The Knicks blitzed it. He makes a great read there where there's only one player on the backside because Nesmith has lifted up to the wing, and that's an easy shot for Miles. Miles had a lot of good plays in the third quarter where the Knicks were, mixing up their coverages. Sometimes Nembhard, they were switching out against Nembhard, and Nembhard was making the right play for Miles under the rim against, the interior mismatch as well. Like, it was just telling to me that the opposite of what at least I thought, where I thought, the Knicks have played so many big minutes, they're going to run out of gas. And it turns out like Jalen Brunson literally almost outscored the Pacers himself. Like, he had 14 points. The Pacers had 17. And this is the type of stuff that was showing up. And to be fair, like they did try. I mean, Pascal and Nemhard were the only two players that attempted shots during that span, but they weren't the only two players that were initiating things. Like Tyrese did have 3 turnovers. They were trying to run some of the stuff with Tyrese that the Knicks were just denying and taking the Pacers out of. So I don't know. I guess I would like to know your thoughts about what you thought of the Pascal OG matchup overall.
Pascal looked bigger. That's meaningful. Sometimes Pascal, like the Portis thing, is Pascal had to outmaneuver Portis, and Portis had a decent time on the other end, obviously because he's bigger. That OG is very strong, but Pascal's taller. Pascal's a little bit longer. You could tell that difference in the post. I think especially the Pacers missed a couple opportunities for that early work to be rewarded by Pascal, because Pascal was very diligent in getting low. And it wasn't even necessarily just against OG. I know that's the matchup we're talking about, but Pascal pinned guys like within 8 feet pretty continuously throughout the game. Well done to Pascal for keeping his dribble clean, for like staying away from where OG could be quite dangerous. And keeping OG in a post up is one of the best ways to limit him, because this is something, you know, our mutual friend Polar will talk about, is just the way that OG is built. Like quick swivels and stuff like that isn't necessarily his bag. He's really good at covering big spaces and containing and staying in front. But when you kind of get small in the post with your movements and can get big over top to finish, that's where Pascal has some very inherent advantages over OG, because OG is technically guarding up against Pascal, even though it's not really talked about that way. I thought the shot making from Pascal against OG in particular, 4 or 5, I think, in the game, pretty good. Happy with it. I wonder what it looks like when I think they inevitably expand what types of touches they go to with Pascal in this series. And I'll be very interested to see the coverage. But game 1, he had OG's number. He went to what was like, the post was clearly an advantage for Pascal. OG looked not, he didn't look bad, but he just, it's tough to like be the post stopper. It's just not an easy thing to do when a guy is really good in the post. So that's my opinion of that, I guess, coverage. And also they have to be like the Pacers, that what you pointed out too is like having Pascal in the corner. That means OG gets to be like a strong side dig guy who can dig, can get turnovers. And even if he doesn't, he can recover, whether it's like recovering baseline if there's a cut behind him, or recovering out to the 3 if the guy stays home to be a catch and shoot guy. You have to be really mindful of where you try and place OG as far as like being a guy who can step off and help his teammates. So that's my opinion on that coverage and matchup so far, I think.
And I think this is some of what the 3 of us anticipated, because I felt like they would probably be more aggressive against Tyrese, try to be denying Tyrese because they needed to slow the pace. As it turns out, the Knicks actually scored more fast break points than the Pacers in this game. In part because Josh Hart was a one-man wrecking crew that no one could apparently stop on 94-foot drives. And that they would be a little bit more willing to see what OG could do in the post rather than sending the double teams. I think I would probably, if I were the Pacers, test that out and see how willing are they to live with that matchup in the next game, just because of what I saw from the Knicks double teaming the post against the Sixers and what Benji and I had talked about. Like they struggled with doubling one pass away, and when they went away from doubling one pass away and were having OG double from the weak side elbow, then those rotations get a lot more confusing, and that's how Buddy ended up going off from the corner. So, like, even if Tyrese, whatever's going on with him, if you're just placing him as the post entry passer to Pascal and then letting him screen away with the amount of face guarding he's seeing, that gives you more options, and I'd be curious to see what the Knicks do to cover it if Pascal can continue to do what he did in game 1, albeit on somewhat limited amount of reps as far as the actual post-ups. I think that's kind of where I end up landing. If the trends with Tyrese continue, we'll see how he looks after a day off when he gets into game 2. I suppose maybe you can feel that out from the start, but
this is one of the most interesting things about the Pacers, and was something you and I were thinking about right when Pascal got traded there, our first day coverage. What type of packages do they use for Pascal? How creative are they? Because he is a speed thing from what they typically like to do. He can fit in, he can do lots of stuff, but as far as his greatest strength, it is a knuckleball. And how often do they go to that? What types of actions do they run to support that? How are they occupying the weak side, and how are they forming up off of his post-up, off of his like bully drive and all that kind of stuff? They've probably left a lot of meat on the bone on the run-up to the playoffs with that. And there's been some in the playoffs. And it'll be really, really good to see how they shape up around it. It's kind of funny. I was looking at the box score, and I went to Josh Hart's plus minus. Can I tell you what the plus minus is in a guy who plays 48 minutes? It's whatever the difference is at the end of the game. 24 points, 13 boards, 8 assists, 3 steals, 69% from the field. And he hit that crazy pull-up 3. The finishes at the rim were so good. His first offensive rebound, he was boxed out. He was boxed out like 12 feet from the basket, and he just like worked his way under the basket and tapped it out. He got interviewed, I think, third quarter or first half, and it sounded like something everybody's like, well, he can't mean that, because he's like, yeah, we're comfortable with the pace of the game. I don't know if all the Knicks are comfortable with the pace of the game, but Josh Hart was like, yeah, we can play this stuff. We can do this. We're comfortable with it. And in my mind, I was listening. I was like, I don't know if they can. Like, this seems to favor the Pacers. But he got his get back, man. He's incredible. It's been 6 years where I've been like, oh, I want Josh Hart on the Raptors. I wasn't there his rookie season. I'll be honest. I wasn't fully there. But, like, I've been pining for this man. He is so good at basketball. Like, he's incredible. Oh, he's great.
I had a tweet when the Pacers played the Knicks, I think in December, and had that meme that says, like, Lord, I've seen what you've done for other people, and I want that for me. Because the Pacers were so bad at rebounding. But that rebound you're bringing up, like, Nembhard literally went chest to chest.
Yes.
Like, he turned and spotted him. And, like, I know I criticized Patrick Beverley for doing that against Tyrese, but it was the reverse, because it was an advantage for Tyrese because Patrick Beverley was face guarding Tyrese on those possessions. You can't spot the ball. You're not jumping in a position of strength. Nembhard spotted the rebound, turned and went chest to chest, and Josh Hart still got the rebound. Like, I'll admit, though, that missed free throw that he was able to get of his own was rather ridiculous. But another Josh Hart moment, Isaiah Jackson ran the floor on transition, had a dunk, and Josh Hart ran that immediately back on the Pacers the other way, 94 feet, and Isaiah didn't exactly rotate or do much to stop that at the other end. So I kind of want to talk about the bench lineups a little bit, because the starters did lose their minutes. They were minus 12, I think, in 17 and a half minutes played. Certainly lost the last 6.5 minutes of the game. The bench, big for the Pacers. It's going to be big for the Pacers throughout this game. Were you at all surprised, as I was, that Isaiah Jackson was the backup 5 in this matchup, and that they played him in lineups with both Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin, meaning that Obi Toppin was at the 3?
Real Isaiah Jackson supporters hours over here. I was surprised. I really liked it. I am admittedly sometimes, and it's been a good spot to be over the past however many years, sometimes playing big can really paper over some stuff. Like, it really, really can. And going to those lineups where they play big, especially if TJ's involved as like a driver, and TJ is really good, as you said, the simpler defensive coverages, simpler defensive matchups that allow for some of that. But TJ is also a guy who's very comfortable in crowded spaces. If you're going to play a lineup with less spacing, TJ is a very natural alliance at point guard to support that, I think, because he's comfortable regardless. Playing big, you can really kind of muck up the floor on defense, and especially against these Knicks, hanging in that way, I think, was effective, and I loved watching that. And part of that was because Isaiah Jackson, it's not necessarily something you can bank on every time. This is, young bigs, springboard bigs like that. Sometimes they find it, sometimes they don't. His impact on the game was really palpable, and like, he brought it, and his athleticism, his energy helped change the tune for like a little bit. So I was surprised to see it, but I liked it a lot.
Yeah, because Benji messaged me over the weekend and he was like, "Do you think this could be a Jalen Smith series?" And I said, "I think one of the centers will play, and Jalen makes sense because he would be out there opposite of Mitchell Robinson. He can step out and shoot a three, and also the minutes between Pascal and Isaiah Jackson haven't paired super well during the regular season, in part because they like to use the inverted spacing with a guard in the dunker, and you can't really do that if Isaiah's out there. He needs to be in the dunker. What's the spacing going to end up being?" But then the longer we watched it, I was like, if you do want to mix in some traps and have somebody step out above the level of the screen, sometimes against Jalen Brunson, Isaiah is the best option. He can keep the pace up and run the floor. Although like I said, his conditioning can somewhat wane. Like, because he does run the floor somewhat hard, then it's situations where like Josh Hart runs the ball back and he's not exactly ready to rotate. But he did have some pretty impressive defensive possessions. I felt like one time he stabbed at the ball against a hostage dribble to get them to slow down in that small space, and then was able to get back and get the recovery block. He had the really nice lefty reverse finish, which I always point out that some reason he like tends to go more so to his left hand, even though he's a right-handed shooter. But
that was on the Tyrese short roll Pascal pump. And nice little play by those three guys navigating small spaces there.
And
hope to see more of it.
And then when he ended up coming out was when he got beat coming out at the really bad angle to Josh Hart on that drive from the wing, and then they ended up making the substitution. But I think that those were mainly the advantages of it, and especially because they were like the Knicks, it made them play lineups that they weren't really used to running because they put Precious Achiuwa out there to try to match size initially. Then in the second half, the Knicks were like, nope, we're just going to go super small, and they played four guards when the Pacers had those three out there, which then I was a little bit curious for me because it was almost the opposite. Like, it felt like that was another moment where like you could have been posting Pascal, even sometimes maybe, having Obi seal or duck in or throwing it to Isaiah in the dunker spot. And it became a lot more 3-point oriented for a little bit of a stretch where it's like, hey, let's run this same play for Ben Shepherd. And that's whenever Ben Shepherd like tossed the air ball off the staggered screen. And I was a little bit like, what are we doing here when you have that much size on the floor? And the second biggest player is Josh Hart. But
gosh, speaking of the other front court, and credit to, and I do think maybe we should take a little bit of time for Obi, just an East Bay, unbelievable dunk, but a really good game. I'm not so sure you get this bad a Mitchell Robinson game.
Yeah,
I'm not so sure, but I think like the Hartenstein stuff went better for the Knicks than I expected it to. And I wonder if, like, do you think it's sustainable to expect the Hartenstein stuff to fall off a little bit from where it was, which I expect? But do you think that Mitchell Robinson will stay like where it was? Like, do you think the front court can become a battleground that the Pacers like really dominate in this series? Because the Knicks, they should win it there, but the Knicks hung in.
I think that Miles is pretty adaptable to the different coverages that Isaiah Hartenstein's going to be able to play, and I think that he showed that pretty heavily in the third quarter. The thing about Isaiah is that might be like the most physical I've seen him be as a rebounder, especially on the defensive end. So the fact that he was able to keep Mitchell Robinson off the glass on some of those and get like tap outs, I don't know how replicable I necessarily think that's going to be, because that's not necessarily something that you always see with him, though. If he thinks that he's getting those minutes regularly. He played better last night than he played in the two games when he got an opportunity against the Bucks, for sure. So I don't exactly know what Mitchell Robinson's overall health situation has been either. I didn't think that he looked like he was moving the best in certain spots of that, but that might have been because the pace was what it was when the Pacers bench was out there, which was up. And yeah, I mean, Obi playing at the 3, though, that was an interesting one for me. I didn't fully think that was where he would be playing coming into this game.
Sometimes it's shot making. Like Pascal had that really nice Euro knifing into the paint, goes out to Obi. There's a bit of shot making. You get a couple fast breaks with Obi out there. He's going to be a part of it. Either like changing how the defense is guarding the lanes on the court because of his presence there. For example, like Pascal missed that layup and they missed the 2 free throws. If Obi, and I was watching the game with a leg and I said, oh, like badly timed pass. Pascal caught it where it wasn't comfortable to put down the dribble. Josh Hart would have been able to get 2 hands for a dig, and it was also going to make him jump from too far away. But if Obi catches that, he's punching it. Obi is such a presence in transition, and that shot making and kind of like the ability to duck in on offense too. It's showing up. He continues to show up. He continues to be there every game. He's impressive. I want to give some flowers because he keeps winning minutes. He keeps doing great things. 12, 6, and 3 in what, 19 minutes? 5-7 from the field, 6 boards, +4. No slouch. He's been awesome.
I mean, like I said, that's going to be a key battleground because the bench is going to have to push the pace. Because I mean, you're hoping that the longer the series goes, that the Pacers are eventually going to be the fresher team. That what happened at the end of the first quarter of this game, hopefully, doesn't happen the longer that you're in the series. And he's clearly a pretty key part of that. I didn't grab a clip, but I do want to point out and say that I think one of the most guaranteed shots in any Pacer game is going to be at either the end of the first or the third quarter when TJ McConnell has the ball and they run 1-4 flat pick and roll. And the player standing at the right block, doesn't matter who it is. Could be Ben Shepherd's going to go set a go screen. Could be Isaiah Jackson's going to approach for a ball screen. I don't really care. TJ is going to get into the paint and get into that gap at space, and he's most likely going to make the shot or get to the rim. I don't even know if he made the shot necessarily in this specific play, but I would like to know from you. I have watched this, I don't know how many times, like once against the Detroit Pistons where Evan Fournier, of all defenders, was guarding the player at that right block. The Pistons had tons of time to pre-switch that player out. Like, it's abundantly obvious. Like, this is the play that the Pacers run at the end of those two quarters every single game. We all know what's happening. And teams do not pre-switch that player out. Like, even last night, OG Anunoby standing right beside Isaiah Jackson. Everybody knows Isaiah Jackson's going to go set that screen out of the dunker spot up for TJ to drive and get into the paint, and nobody pre-switches it. And TJ just gets right to his spot again. It's like it's the least scouted play, despite the fact that it's the most predictable play that the Pacers run.
TJ might be a little, as somebody who underrates TJ, he might be a little underrated when guys like, if that's a read, right? Let's say
like thinking that he's not going to stop them. So like, oh, well, I'll just leave Mitchell Robinson on Isaiah Jackson and just let TJ go instead of screaming him out of there or off-ball switching him out of there. It's wild to me. I make fun of it fairly often because teams just keep falling for it every game.
There's always going to be meat on the bone, you know? Like 48 minutes of basketball, you're not always going to make the right read. And I feel like maybe that's just something that Thibodeau and his staff are missing, because that seems like something that you have to like be like, this is something we're doing. Like, you got to pre-switch that. And if you don't, and you don't have any guidelines around it, I don't think TJ is a guy who engenders okay, let's start pre-switching response, like that type of read from the guys on the court. And maybe he should. Because god damn, does he just get into the paint, man.
He should. And now I'm about ready to tell YouTube another article that I would really like to write if I had league-wide access, which is the gamesmanship of play calling. Like when a coaching staff, like the Pacers and specifically, like just to call out Mike Weinar, like he knows, hey, it's the end of the quarter. This team is going to run this set, or after a made basket, they're going to go to this specific horns play, and he'll be up calling it out really regularly. This happened a few times against the Oklahoma City Thunder where he knew a specific stack wrinkle that they were going to write. He called it out, and then Mark on the other side would be like, okay, well, don't run that. We're gonna go into something else because now they know we're going to run it. And I'm always very curious with that. Like when a coach calls out a play, do you lean into it and just be like, hey, they know our play, let's make them overeager and then reject it? Like Tyrese likes to do that a lot. Like he calls out plays specifically and then gets players overeager on a Spain action who reject it or whatever. Or do you pivot mid-possession and try to go something else? Because I think most of the time when a coaching staff tries to pivot and go to something else, it goes poorly for them. Like almost all the time when they're like, well, back out of that play, they know what we're going to run. And so that like, it just surprises me that, like I said, that the Pacers literally run this at the end of those two quarters, pretty much every game, and that there aren't coaching staff just sitting on it and being like, well, here it comes. Get ready to switch that.
I think maybe the way we think about that and why you're correct is that we are all very much, even if we don't watch it that much, like football pilled. Football, if you know what the other team is running and you gear up for it, like they have to audible. You can really, really cover it. Basketball, because it has less contact than football. Basketball, you can't just lock guys up. Like, okay, I know where you're going. I'm going to meet you in the spot. You can't get past me because I'm going to tackle you. Basketball is a game of like strengths win. So if you run a really good play and they say, oh, we know they're running it, gear up for it. It's like, okay, let's see. Because we're really good at what we do here. And so pivoting out of a strength, I wouldn't. And that's kind of what we're talking about with like everything about Indiana, is that since I'm not affiliated with any, like I'm not in the Indiana market, I'll take it seems to me like Tyrese isn't healthy and he's dealing with stuff. The Pacers are constantly having to pivot away from strengths. Pivoting away from strengths is not fun or good in basketball. So both those things intertwine and coalesce that like run your best plays, even if the other team knows, because they're your best plays for a reason. And the Pacers don't have access to some of those right now.
And I genuinely think that using that knowledge that they know that we know works to your advantage a lot of the time.
What's
like
that? Ben Stiller in Dodgeball. I know that you know. You know that I know. And I know that you know that I know that you know. Exactly. Like that, yeah.
Genuinely, so sorry to everybody who really didn't want to listen to this nerdy conversation about play call gamesmanship. I do tweet about it on occasion. Sometimes people like it. Sometimes people are like, okay, we don't even know what you're talking about at this point. But
I had someone say they listened to the full preview, a friend, and they were like, I didn't understand a lick, but I really appreciate that you guys talked a lot of basketball. You know.
Well, that's upsetting because I even curated clips along with what we were talking about in hopes that the illustrations would be there and reinforce the talking points.
I think the clips make up what, like 4% of the podcast. We have a certain audience, I think. We understand that.
I suppose. But I do want to say, too, that we didn't really talk about Jalen Brunson. By comparison, Tyrese takes 6 shots. Only 1 is a 2-pointer. Jalen Brunson scores over 40 points and only makes 1 3. So what did you make of the overall coverage against Jalen Brunson and the many different defenders that they tried to guard him with?
So I told you very much about my friend who is the like Nembhard is the star in Indiana. He was talking to me and he's like, Nembhard is doing such a good job of forcing Brunson into tough shots. Like, this is great defense. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I understand the sentiment. I'm not so sure like I agree with it. Hard shots, it sounds ridiculous to say, this is Brunson's office. This is where he thrives. This is where he lives. Containment is not the defense that works against Brunson. Right. And that sucks because I love containment defenders. I love guys who are like, they bottle it up, they keep it in front, they simplify, the team can stay in scheme. Nembhard is doing that.
Yep.
Brunson is bludgeoning you. And I don't even blame Nembhard there because there's no one else there's hardly anyone in the whole league who can be like so aggressive in guarding Brunson that it becomes not contained. You have to do it. It has to be like 2-man actions. As you said, like Isaiah, stepping out, really overwhelming quickly and far away from the basket. Like, you have to change the terms of engagement repeatedly.
And the one time they did that, they gave up an offensive rebound.
Exactly. And so Brunson is just so good at thriving in the middle of the court where so many players are uncomfortable. Defenses aren't really geared to take away what he likes best. You have to invert so many principles. You have to go against so much of what you like to do to make him feel uncomfortable. And so he wins. So Jalen Brunson wins most of the plays that he participates in, to the tune of now, 4 straight 40-plus point playoff games. He is a rock star. He is incredible. I might be biased because he's a lefty and go lefties, but like, geez, man. And that's the thing too. Like I said at the top, I know the reffing stuff, it didn't go the Pacers' way. Objectively, it didn't go the Pacers' way. But Jalen went 14 for 14 from the line. Jalen hit shots late. When the Knicks had the opportunity, the Knicks made the best of it. And Brunson was a mammoth part of that, obviously. He was unbelievable. He's tough to crack, you know?
And the problem is that when Nembhard got into the early foul trouble and they had to go to Nesmith, I was like, it's upsetting that Nembhard is in foul trouble because Nesmith is most assuredly going to get into foul trouble. And he did. And then, like, TJ had a few disruptive possessions against him. That actually went a little bit better than I overall expected it to go, I feel. But like what you're saying, and interestingly enough, about Brunson being a lefty, something that I noticed with Nembhard in the fourth quarter is I've talked to the Pacers about what they want as closeout techniques. And I'm always fascinated by whether you would use a weak hand or a strong hand contest, or you would contest to the face. And I was told when I asked the question that the preference would be that you close to the midline of the body and close to the eyes, because it's similar to like when you look into the sun when you're driving a car, and if you put down that shade, you blink your eyes. And they found that to be more effective than, just closing to the person's shooting pocket. But Andrew kind of does that instinctively. So there would be possessions last year against Trae Young where he would use a weak hand contest to disrupt Trae Young's shooting pocket in isolation situations. Like last night, he was switching his hand specifically against Brunson so that he would have the one up out at the 3-point line against Brunson as a lefty. And it just was not mattering. Like he was still just shooting up over the top and making those cozy shots in his spots from mid-range anyways. And it's like, again, I'm with you. I think a lot of Nembhard as a defender. I just think this is a really tough individual matchup for him. I think it's the matchup that gave him the most trouble during the regular season, and that didn't really change my overall opinion last night.
Because it's not really fair. You need size,
right?
And you need size that is really bothersome in the rear view contest without fouling, and you need size that like stays in front. And it's not necessarily about bothering the dribble. It's about being able to hang on the push. It's being able to like slide up on the turnaround fader, and to be able to do those two things without fouling. Those are the two things you have to lock down as a defender against Brunson. And yeah, there's like 4 guys in the NBA who would feel pretty comfortable there. Tough.
Well, when he plays against Jaden McDaniels in the NBA Finals, I suppose we'll find out.
That'd be a good matchup. I would also be overjoyed to not have the Boston Celtics in the finals. If the Knicks beat the Celtics, ooh, I'm happy.
I gotta tell you, you have a friend that covers and watches the Timberwolves, and I have a friend who lives in Denver, and I did not get to watch the Minnesota Nuggets game last night because I was preparing for this and I was writing an article. The game gets over, and I have a text message from him, which he often forgets that like I don't live in his time zone, and he was just like, the longest text message ever about how terrible the Nuggets are.
Wolves can do is kind of simplify some of that stuff. Even without Gobert was incredible. Simplifying some of that stuff so that Jamal, who has looked really relative to his expectations, especially since the playoff riser thing, not having the creation from him is like a gunshot. Because Michael Porter Jr. is not going. He can be devastating as a play finisher. Aaron Gordon, devastating as a play finisher. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, devastating as a play finisher. Jokic only takes like 16 shots a game, and it's tough to get his volume up above 20. But if you don't have to help really, if your help principles keep you in safe places, the Nuggets lose a lot of the juice quickly because so many of those guys are just so dependent on Jokic and the system for those looks. And then the big Wolves, they crowd a lot of stuff. I love that team.
Defense, it can be fun to watch, can't it
Ooh.
be?
I was, the Wolves, we'll have to see how the playoff run goes over the course of it. But I think they'll have a case to be like the best defense I've seen since the 2019 championship Raptors, because that team was, but the Wolves, it could be better,
We shall see. But as for this game, since that's what I'm here to talk about, I think I'll just close it out and say that I think I was overall fine with what the Pacers' game plan was going into this. I think that they hit the marks that they needed to hit, with the exception of whatever's going on with Tyrese, which I think, they do need to address in some way, shape, or form. Like I talked about the turn screens and being like, if you can't get a turning point out of that, then that needs to be a critical point moving forward, a critical point of emphasis on what you're doing to get him loose, and whether, like I said, that's going to be optimizing spacing and being meticulous with details, or if you're going to be trying to tilt a little bit more into Pascal, because the starters did get outscored. I think going into this, most people thought that the Pacers were going to have to rely on the bench and the pace and trying to keep people fresh for the end of a game when hopefully the Knicks were worn out, and that isn't how this game played out. If anything, I guess the continuing trend is that expect the unexpected with the Pacers. I did think that maybe I was going to get to put out a tweet before that happened at the very end of the game, where there is a very tall sign of Jalen Brunson in Times Square right now that says "Don't sleep." And if the Pacers pulled up an upset in Game 1, I was going to get to tweet out "Don't sleep." But it's a good thing that I didn't put that out ahead of time. Be looking pretty silly in retrospect. But do you have any closing thoughts on this overall game, or what your current temperature check is on the Pacers after this Game 1 loss?
If it is zero sum, there are winners and losers. Like, I don't want to get away from that. But if you ignore some of the peripheral stuff that affected the end of the game, and you just say, like, in the Garden, Game 1, the Pacers got 6 points on 6 shots from Halliburton and, like, a lot of late turnovers. And they didn't hit all the marks that they could. They actually lost the 3-point battle. But the Pacers as a team came in and they won on some of the margins that rely on them kind of mucking it up. Those markers to me say this could be a longer series than some people initially thought. And from the outsider perspective, I want to see the people who I'm, doing work for, the Pacers fans, happiest. Of course, I want the Pacers to win this series, but this is good basketball, and this makes me feel a lot better about the Pacers hanging in. That level of, I don't know about cursing, but like give a shit to go in there and win some of the like grimier battlegrounds, it's pretty important. And the Pacers had played such like non-physical, feckless basketball against the Bucks. Like they allowed a lesser team to punch them in the mouth a few times. And the Knicks are mouth punchers, and the Pacers met the moment there. So I think I feel like I'm watching good basketball. And that wasn't always the case in round 1. So we're at least getting that. Pacers fans should be cautiously optimistic, as much as it sucks to look at Game 1 and say, damn, we should have got that win.
And by that standard, they definitely looked a lot less shell-shocked than they did in Game 1 of the prior series. They definitely looked a lot more ready for this one, especially with it being on the road in a high market, lots of eyeballs situation. So I think that's a good place to close it out. I will go ahead and plug and say that my piece on Tyrese is out. I almost forgot to promote it on Twitter until right before we hopped on here, but it did get published this morning. Samson's recap goes out after these games, which I know a lot of people like and enjoy. I've gone back and read some of them from the last round now that I no longer have to worry about us trying to go. I prefer to go into games without knowing his opinions. That way we can talk about it for the first time on the podcast. But I think that the best thing I can always say about his writing, which I actually told people on podcasts that I did in New York this week about him helping me out, is that even if his byline wasn't on a piece, I would still know that he wrote it. I would still know that Samson wrote that piece. And I think most people would probably agree with me about that because you have a very unique writing style. So we're going to keep
like, he used gumption again.
Good way to deflect the compliment. But anyways, so we're going to keep doing the off day podcast after the games for however long this series lasts. And who knows, maybe it will last much longer than what the general consensus thought that it would. So back again after Game 2.